The Last Light. First prologue. Echoes of a dark legacy. A full decade had passed since the defeat of Lord Alvarin and the recapture of the Western Keep. In the 10 years since, Eldoria had risen from the ashes of necromancy and civil strife. Beneath King Dain's wise leadership, roads were rebuilt, farmlands flourished, and dwarves and elves settled side by side with humans in the capital, forging a realm of unprecedented unity. War-scarred provinces had healed. Old feuds and wounded pride were soothed by shared triumphs and trade deals. Merchants from every corner of the land, human, elven and dwarven, crowded the bustling markets, weaving a tapestry of camaraderie that felt all the more precious for its fragile beginnings. Yet not all was tranquil. Rumors occasionally surfaced of undead stragglers haunting remote areas, animated by residual energies from Malakar's fallen era. A few misguided warlords still clung to dreams of necromantic power, though they were swiftly hunted by the king's rangers. Through it all, one object remained a secret source of unease. The jagged fragment of Malakar's staff, confiscated from Alvarin's ruin and sealed behind dwarven forged vault doors. Despite layers of runic protection, whispers persisted that the fragment stirred whenever certain omens darkened the sky. Indeed, the past 6 months had borne unsettling signs. An unseasonable frost claimed Eldoria's western plains, withering crops in midsummer. Several dwarven soothsayers claimed to have dreamt the same nightmare of a sunless horizon. Elven scryers meditating in the deep glades spoke of a shadowy rift that loomed beyond mortal sight. Among the people, tensions simmered. If another necromancer threatened their hard-won peace, would the realm unite a second time, or would fear tear it apart? King Dain, now older and more tempered by responsibility, strove to reassure his citizens. Still, doubts gnawed at him in the quiet hours of dusk. He had built a strong alliance, but also remembered how easily darkness crept into corners of the land. His memory flickered oft-end to her, the elven sorceress who had sacrificed herself, twice in a way, to save Eldoria. He had seen Lyara only fleetingly in the decade since Alvarin's fall, an ethereal figure who vanished as soon as trouble subsided. She wore the same silver hair, the same pained expression, as though bound to a shadow only she understood. And so, Eldoria stood on the threshold of a new crisis, unsettled by half-glimpsed omens and haunted by the legacy of a necromancer once believed vanquished. If an even more formidable darkness was gathering, then the decade of peace would prove merely the calm before the storm. The gathering storm. The dire warning arrived on a crisp autumn morning. Dain was in the royal archives, comparing dwarven runic manuscripts with a visiting elven scholar, when a breathless messenger staggered through the polished doors. Mud caked the man's boots and cloak, and his eyes were wild with shock. "My king," he gasped, fumbling for words. It struck in the night. The entire fortress at Marshwold, gone." Marshwold was a frontier stronghold, well garrisoned and standing watch near Eldoria's northern wetlands. For it to fall so completely, and in a single night, was unthinkable. Dain bade the messenger to speak, glancing warily at the elven scholar who stood by with equal concern. "Shadows, an army, but not like anything we've seen." The man whispered. "They moved with unholy speed." We heard a voice, commanding the darkness itself. A chill rooted Dain to the spot. For the first time in a decade, that old, cold dread of necromancy filled his veins. He thanked the messenger, summoning healers and stewards to tend him. Then he dispatched orders for the Council of Unity to convene immediately. Within hours, the great hall was abuzz, dwarves and elves and human nobles crowding under vaulted ceilings. Brom, now in his middle years, his fiery beard streaked with silver, arrived forging hammer in hand. He had been living part-time in Ironhold, training new smiths and overseeing the vault that contained Malakar's staff fragment. In hushed tones, Brom confirmed rumors of strange activity around the relic, faint pulses of necromantic energy that had intensified over the past month. Elven emissaries reported that scryers in Verdant Glade sensed a rift growing somewhere far to the northeast, beyond Eldoria's established borders. In their visions, the essence of Malakar's dark magic flickered anew, entangled with a deeper force. The dwarves relayed ominous runic readings from Ironhold's ancestors' tablets, which hinted that certain primordial evils, once sealed away, could break free should necromantic powers reach a critical mass. Tension exploded into arguments. Some dwarven lords believed that forging an army large enough to cross uncharted frontiers was folly. A faction of humans insisted they must fortify the capital instead. Elven elders warned that if the rumored rift was not addressed, it could spill corruption across every border in time. Dain, voice firm, spoke above the clamor. We stand at a crossroads. 10 years ago, we rallied against necromancy and won. Now we face a force that may be even greater. Eldoria will not bury its head in the sand. We must confront this darkness wherever it arises, or watch it devour our peace. With a heavy heart, the council agreed. They would raise a grand coalition unlike anything seen in centuries. Dwarven battalions would muster from Ironhold, humans from Eldoria's capital and southwestern fiefs, and elven warrior mages from the Verdant Glade. A call went out to allied clans beyond Eldoria's immediate domain, urging them to honor old treaties and stand united against the rising storm. War preparations on an epic scale began at once. Third, a perilous alliance. For weeks, caravans of soldiers, siege engines, and supplies poured into staging grounds outside Eldoria's walls, forming an enormous encampment of canvas pavilions. Blacksmiths toiled day and night, forging swords, spears, and new runic wards based on Brom's designs. 11 artisans etched protective sigils onto massive war banners. Humans drilled in new formations that integrated dwarven shield liners and elven spellcasters. Rumor held that even the reclusive wood elf tribes and some wandering folk from beyond Eldoria's southern deserts had pledged small contingents, acknowledging the gravity of this threat. Despite the sense of purpose, tensions simmered. Over a decade of peace had allowed old prejudices to reawaken. A dwarven commander muttered that elves took too long with their elaborate rituals. Human foot soldiers, new to alliance warfare, grumbled about dwarven discipline and elven secrecy. In more than one rowdy tavern, fights erupted over trifling slights. King Dain spent each dawn walking the rows of tents, speaking to every rank, reminding them what they stood to lose. His presence, scarred by previous wars and proven in countless battles, helped quench the embers of conflict. Yet he knew discipline alone wouldn't unify them fully. Their unity would have to be tested on the battlefield, under the crucible of genuine threat. Amid the controlled chaos, Brom labored with dwarven runesmiths to create new weapons designed to repel necromancy on a grand scale. He consulted 11 enchanters to craft staves capable of dispelling swaths of undead. By day, his hammer rang against the anvil. By night, he pored over ancient tomes describing the processes that once sealed primal evils. Each hammer strike echoed his unspoken fear that even their combined might be insufficient. Days turned into weeks, the colossal army swelling to numbers not seen in living memory. Scouts returned with harrowing accounts. Entire villages north of Marshwold had fallen silent, their inhabitants vanished. spectral storms raged across the plains, forming an eerie corridor that seemed to point to the mountainous frontiers beyond Eldoria's recognized borders. More ominous still, half-mad refugees spoke of an unseen general orchestrating it all, a being whose name twisted on their tongues, Malakar, reborn. Even more startling, a few battered survivors claimed to have caught glimpses of a silver-haired elf saving them from the gloom, only for her to vanish into the mists. Lyara. Some labeled it nonsense, others a miracle. Dain alone believed it wholeheartedly, certain that if Lyara was drawn to these dark happenings, the danger was indeed dire. The path into darkness. At last, everything was ready. Banners and horns heralded the departure of Eldoria's grand host. Thousands of human knights, dwarven axe-bearers, elven mage archers, and allied contingents marched from the capital in shining ranks. Their columns stretched miles. War wagons creaked under siege engines, supply carts rattled, outriders scouted ahead, and from the skies falconers guided swift birds to relay messages. On hilltops, common folk gathered to watch in awed silence. It was a sight of unmatched magnitude, hope and fear braided together in one unstoppable tide. King Dain rode at the vanguard upon a warhorse clad in silver plates etched with dwarven wards. Brom marched with him, accompanied by an elite squad of dwarven runesmiths. Elven warmaster Erendil, a seasoned sorcerer, commanded the mages who marched under banners depicting the phoenix of the verdant glade. Even small groupings of human volunteer militias joined the throng, brandishing newly forged spears. They advanced across the plains once well known to them, but soon the land grew bleak. Winds carried an unsettling chill, and the grass took on a greyish hue. The undead assaulted them in waves, lesser ghouls that tested the front lines. Occasional monstrous abominations, stitched from the bodies of men and beasts, lurched forward like siege towers of flesh. The allied army fought in massive formations seldom seen, dwarves forming iron shields to absorb the brunt, elves releasing spells that crackled arcs of light through undead ranks, and humans driving the enemy back with cavalry charges. The scale of battle was unlike anything in living memory. Every clash rattled the ground with the thunder of steel on bone, magic sizzling the air. Still they pressed on, carving a path through the monstrous swarms. Their losses, though real, were mitigated by the synergy of the three allied races. This was the dream Dain had championed for over a decade, a single front, unbroken. But each victory was overshadowed by the sense that the worst lay ahead. After weeks of relentless campaigning, they reached a parched desert that stretched beyond Eldoria's normal boundary. Here, the sky glowed with a dull red cast, as if diseased. Obsidian spires jutted from cracked earth. This was the territory from which Marshwald's attackers had come, the epicenter of the necromantic storms. Elven scryers felt a pulse in the air, like the beat of a dark heart. They called it a rift, a rent in the barrier between the mortal world and a realm of shadow. Encamped in the desert's edge, the allied host took stock. Morale dipped under the oppressive gloom. At dusk, swirling shapes appeared on the horizon. Ever larger undead armies, including massive siege abominations with rotting hides and entire squads of skeletal archers. Lightning, black and violet, tore across the sky, sizzling the sand into twisted glass. The final confrontation drew near. That night, Dain received a visitor. While he paced alone by the flickering torchlight, his guards dozing, Lyara appeared at the edge of the camp. She looked older, though her elven features remained otherworldly. Her silver hair was pulled back, revealing new lines of exhaustion. He rushed to her side, half in relief, half in fear. "You're here," he breathed, voice tight with unspoken concern. Her eyes shone with sorrow. "I've followed the same path of destruction that led you here. The rift is almost fully open, Dain. Malakar's spirit is stirring within it, but not alone. Something greater commands him now, an ancient force fueling all this necromancy." Dain felt an icy hand close around his heart. "Do we stand any chance against it?" Lyara raised her sleeve, revealing the faint traces of the black mark that once nearly consumed her. "I'm bound to this darkness. I feel its will drawing me closer, trying to claim me again. But we have one advantage. I can sense the rift's core. If you can get me close enough, there might be a way to seal it from inside." Dain gazed at her grimly. He remembered the times her sacrifice saved Eldoria. "We'll do whatever it takes, but I won't let you face it alone." She smiled sadly, as if recalling all their battles. "Nor I you. V. The Return of Malakar. Come dawn, the allied army arrayed itself in a massive semicircle at the desert's center. It was an awe-inspiring sight. Rank upon rank of human knights, spear-wielding militias, dwarven shock troops in steel plate with runic banners, and elven archers bristling along dune ridges. Siege engines, trebuchets, dwarven cannon-like contraptions, arcane ballista lined the rear. A hush fell on the ranks as they awaited the inevitable assault. They did not wait long. With an unearthly roar, countless undead poured from the swirling darkness, led by towering monstrosities and spectral cavalry. Thunder boomed, though no clouds dotted the sky. Waves of dust-laden wind battered the living lines. Across the dunes, a monstrous shape came into view. A colossal undead worm, ribs and scales fused with black iron, slithering across the sands with impossible speed. On its back rode a figure clad in torn robes, eyes burning like emerald fire. "Malakar!" Brom growled, tightening his grip on a runic warhammer. "It seems so," Dain responded, cold resolve in his voice. A single command from Dain's lips unleashed the clash. Thousands of allied soldiers surged forward, meeting the undead in an earth-shaking impact. Magic-laced trebuchet rounds arced overhead, exploding among clustered hordes. Elven mages conjured massive illusions to disorient the ghastly cavalry. Dwarven sappers set timed runic charges that blew undead abominations into smoking shards. The entire desert churned into a maelstrom of shrieks and war cries. From atop the worm Malakar, his body reconstituted by shadowy power, extended a staff of bone, releasing waves of necrotic energy that turned patches of sand into festering tar, dragging men and dwarves down. Bolstered by the primeval force lurking within the rift, he seemed unstoppable. Yet the allied host, far larger and more coordinated than in any prior conflict, refused to break. Legions of spearmen advanced behind dwarven shield walls, while overhead, arcs of bright elven lightning hammered the worm's flank. Lyara and a group of elven sorcerers sprinted under cover of the dwarven front lines, weaving a protective ward designed to approach Malakar's position. Brom, leading a contingent of runesmiths, hammered away at the swirling undead near the worm's tail, seeking to disrupt the necromancer's hold on his monstrous mount. Dain plunged deep into the fray on horseback, rallying pockets of allies threatened by encroaching undead. The battle was beyond anything Eldoria had known. A single sprawling engagement that spanned miles, tens of thousands locked in mortal struggle. And all the while, the rift pulsed in the distance like a second sun gone dark. Occasionally it crackled, releasing fresh tides of undead. The ground quaked, splitting to reveal skeletal monstrosities buried eons ago. Even with the courage and cunning of the allied host, the tide threatened to consume them. 6. the final sacrifice. As the day wore on, Malakar seemed to falter. Runesmith charges and destructive spells chipped away at his worm's bony armor. With a keening shriek, the worm collapsed, sending up a cloud of black dust. Malakar catapulted forward, landing gracefully among the remains. His green eyes seethed with malice. In a single swirl of his staff, he unleashed tendrils of pure darkness that battered entire companies to their knees. Yet Dain, Brom, and Lyara pressed in with a cadre of elite knights and dwarven veterans, forging a wedge through the undead. Malakar recognized them immediately, a sneer twisting his ruined features. "You again," he hissed. "Have you learned nothing? 10 years of your fragile peace, undone in moments by a power older than your petty alliances." Lyara, eyes blazing with magic, advanced. "You bowed to that power, Malakar, but we won't. Eldoria stands united against you." Malakar responded with a blast of necrotic force. The defenders raised their warded shields, runes flaring. A thunderous clash filled the air as Brom's hammer connected with Malakar's staff, shattering bone shards. Dain lunged with his sword, forcing the necromancer back. All around them, the final battle raged. War drums thundered, catapults launched flaming projectiles, and the clang of steel on steel melded with the moans of the dying. Then, as if enraged by Malakar's predicament, the rift roared into new life. A shockwave rippled outward, flattening friend and foe alike. The desert sands swirled into a howling vortex, and from within that vortex emerged a shape, formless but immense. A whisper echoed in every mind on the battlefield, ancient, malevolent, and alien intelligence. The Eldritch Shadow. It was the primeval entity that had once seduced Malakar to darkness, and it now threatened to devour all of Eldoria. In the swirling gloom, Malakar dissolved into a swirl of ectoplasmic essence, merging with the Eldritch Shadow's form. His laughter reverberated in the minds of every combatant. The newly formed being towered above the battlefield, a roiling mass of black energy with a skull-like visage flickering in its core. "I am beyond Malakar, beyond mortal comprehension," it intoned in a voice that rolled like thunder. "All shall serve me in death." Despair threatened to claw at the hearts of the allied army. The aura of the Eldritch Shadow sapped strength and hope alike. Then Lyara's voice rang clear. "We must seal the rift. It's fueling this entity. If we close it, the Eldritch Shadow's hold on our realm will break." She looked to Dain. "Hold them back. I'll do what must be done." Dain's throat tightened. He sensed what her eyes foretold. This would cost her dearly. "We'll give you the chance," he said fiercely. Rallying the battered ranks, Dain ordered a final push. Dwarves in heavy plate encircled the rift's perimeter, setting runic anchors hammered into the ground. Elven mages chanted a complex litany, weaving a dome of protective wards. Brom led the rearmost line, driving out the last remnants of undead so they couldn't flank Lyara as she advanced to the swirling epicenter. Power radiated off Lyara in waves, a swirl of white and black, the two energies in precarious balance. She extended her hands, voice carrying above the hurricane of sand and shrieking undead. "Ancient guardians of Eldoria, heed me. In your name, I reclaim this boundary. Darkness, be sealed." The rift responded, lightning crackling overhead, arcs of violet against a bruised sky. The Eldritch Shadow howled, striking down at Lyara with a massive claw of living darkness. In a flash, Dain leaped to intercept the blow, shield raised. The impact shattered his shield, hurling him away, but Brom and a cluster of dwarven warriors filled the gap, forging a protective arc of runic wards. Blood trickled from Dain's mouth, but he struggled to his feet, refusing to leave her undefended. The allied lines fought like demons, pinning the eldritch shadow's monstrous limbs. Elven arrows of white flame pierced writhing appendages. Dwarven catapults hammered the swirling mass, and human knights poured forward in unstoppable waves, ignoring the stench of necrotic power and broken ground. The scale of destruction was immense, thousands of warriors locked in a do-or-die stand around the dimensional tear. Lyara's chant rose to a crescendo. Raw energy crackled around her, swirling faster and faster. She directed her power into the rift, bending the currents of necromancy and life magic alike. The ground quaked, and the vortex behind the eldritch shadow began to shrink, arcs of energy snapping like cords under strain. The entity shrieked, flailing with the combined rage of Malakar's spirit and the ancient evil that bound him. Moments from closure, the rift unleashed a final burst of dark lightning, striking Lyara squarely in the chest. She stumbled, tears of pain slipping down her cheeks. For an agonizing instant, the swirling energy seemed on the verge of unraveling. Then, with a sob that carried both sorrow and defiance, she hurled the last ounce of her life force into the sealing spell. Radiance flooded the desert. The rift collapsed on itself with a deafening roar, its swirling maw snapping shut in a blast of brilliance. The eldritch shadow gave one final echoing scream, torn apart by the recoil. Malakar's presence flickered once, then vanished into the ether. When the light receded, the remaining undead collapsed into piles of bone and dust. The howling wind ceased, leaving an eerie stillness broken only by the labored breaths of the survivors and the groans of the wounded. In the center of the newly sealed ground, Lyara lay motionless. Dain crawled to her side, ignoring the searing pain in his bruised limbs, pressing his trembling hand to hers. Her eyes flickered open for the briefest moment, a ghost of a smile on her lips. She whispered so faint that only Dain could hear, "Eldoria is free. Protect them. Always." Then her eyes fluttered shut, and the pale glow that had traced her veins faded into nothing. The woman who had twice saved the kingdom from shadow gave her final breath among the swirling dust of a battlefield that would be remembered for generations. 7th Epilogue. A dawn unbroken. In the days following the greatest battle in Eldoria's recorded history, survivors labored to tend the wounded and bury the fallen. The desert itself began to transform. The lingering aura of necromancy dissipated, revealing patches of new greenery that somehow sprouted amid the dunes, as though life's triumph over death had become literal in the land. The Allied forces erected a massive memorial at the site of the sealed rift. Chiseled from a single obsidian spire, it bore the names of those who fought and died. At the top, an elven carving depicted Lyara, arms extended as though casting the final spell that saved Eldoria. The dwarves inlaid runes of remembrance, and the humans brought fresh flowers from every corner of the kingdom to lay at its base. King Dain, battered yet unbroken, led the solemn ceremonies. Brom stood beside him, tears glistening in his weathered eyes as he gazed at the carved tribute. The two men, who had once been exiles and outcasts, now embodied the unity that delivered the realm from annihilation. Dain gave a stirring speech to the assembled armies. "We have endured the unthinkable, not once, but thrice. Darkness sought to claim our world. We did not yield, we overcame. Let this day stand as proof that when dwarves, elves, and humans unite, fueled by the memory of those lost, no evil can prevail. May we never forget the price of our freedom." In the aftermath, the Allied host dispersed. Dwarven battalions returned to Ironhold with new treaties and new bonds forged in blood. Elven mages, their numbers thinned, carried Lyara's story back to the verdant glade, weaving it into epic ballads that would be sung for centuries. Human knights marched home to families waiting in Eldoria's capital, each man and woman forever changed by the scale of what they had witnessed and survived. Despite the sorrows of war, a new era dawned. The destruction of the rift and the eldritch shadow lifted an ancient blight from the land. Trade and travel thrived again, free from undead raids and necromantic storms. The dwarves, with elven help, scoured the realm for any remaining fragments of Malakar's vile artifacts, determined to entomb them in wards so strong they might never again threaten the living. At last, it seemed Eldoria could rest, safe under the watch of a unified people who had proven themselves not just once, but thrice in the face of doom. As for Lyara, her mortal form never returned to Eldoria. Yet, in quiet moments, travelers along the newly reclaimed frontier sometimes reported seeing a fleeting shimmer of silver hair in moonlight, or hearing a distant echo of an elven lullaby on the wind. It was as if her spirit lingered, woven into the very tapestry of magic she had given everything to safeguard. 10 years had brought Eldoria from a struggling peace to the brink of annihilation, and back again. Though battle-scarred, King Dain stood as a beacon of hope and unity, forging a new tradition. The Festival of Dawn, held once a year on the anniversary of the final battle, to celebrate life's triumph over death. From dwarven runes to elven songs, from human heraldry to new alliances with once unknown peoples, the festival ensured that children born in peaceful years would learn the cost and worth of preserving that peace. On the festival's eve, in a quiet courtyard of the royal palace, Dain found himself standing before the statue of Lyara that had once graced the city. He placed a lily, as he had done so many times before. High above, the stars shone brighter than ever, each one a tiny beacon against the endless night. "Your rest is well earned," he murmured, feeling the late summer breeze on his skin. "We'll guard what you gave us, always." In that moment, he could almost sense a soft presence, a whisper of gratitude. Then, the sensation passed, leaving only the serene hush of a world finally free from the necromantic shadows that had menaced it for so long. Eldoria's future stretched before it like a sunlit horizon, bright and unbroken.